All right, welcome to the Right Mindset podcast. I'm here with Carlin and Dakota. Am I saying that right? Dakota?
Yeah, Dakota. Yeah,
Dakota. All right,
or
excellent.
Dakota for short.
I've had my name butchered and it's Thomas. So, I just, which is interesting because Carlin's last name is Thomas. So that
Yep.
means if we got married and I took that maiden name, I'd be Thomas J. Thomas. And I,
Well, it's funny. My wife and I actually had that problem when we got married because her last name was Thomas and my last name was Baker. And my
yeah.
dad's name is Thomas Baker. So even if we wanted to hyphenate, it would just be my dad's name. Which is why we just decided to just take one or the other. Not too many people run into that, I think, but
Yeah,
it was funny.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I know one time I was talking about getting married a long time ago, and like the last name thing came up, and it was I was like, you can keep your last name, like you don't have to take my last name, and then someone from her side of the family was like, well, why don't you take her last name? And I was like, well, I don't mind taking her last name, but I like my last name.
Mm-hmm.
I have a career with it, so it's interesting that like what made you take the name? Having a career and as a writer and stuff like that, did you feel it would interrupt that aspect of your life?
I was actually the opposite. So a little context. I actually have a form of synesthesia, which deals with letters and numbers having distinct personalities to me.
Okay.
So the last name Thomas actually felt like a better fit for my personality than Baker.
Mhm.
So when we got married, I had actually been going under a pen name because I wasn't very fond of my name. I felt like it was too plain. It just didn't fit me. But once I changed it to Thomas, I was like, no, this is it. This feels right. This feels like me. And so then I started actually using my name for publishing.
Yeah, you felt comfortable with it, and
It felt like it represented me, whereas
now
previously it didn't.
so now both of you, I believe, are authors, correct?
Mhm.
If I have that correct. Now, Dakota. I want to say Daytona for some reason because I have dyslexia. My brain's like, actually, I'll put it up for everyone to see just to prove that I just am terrible at reading names. But were you the same way? Like, were you like, I like my name, I'm going to keep it? Or were you on the fence, about maybe potentially taking a pen name?
Um, you know, my real name is actually very Italian. And I felt I didn't really identify with either side of my family and things like that. I'm kind of like the odd man out. So I chose something that more resonated with me. So that's where Dakota Rayne kind of came from. It just kind of popped into my head, and I was like, oh, look, this fits, something that's more me, something that kind of separates me from, my family, because I am kind of separate from my family. So
Mhm.
it kind of embraced something that I felt, and that was my way of expressing
Would you say it reined you into your truth?
it.
Sorry.
Don't apologize
Right?
for that. We love
corny
puns.
Puns are the only thing I know in this industry. Well, thank you for that. No, it's good because what's funny is Thomas J. Bellezza is also my stage name, but it's not my real name, but it's also my real name. And people are like, what do you mean? I go, well, because my middle name's really Joseph. It's not J. But when I was growing up in the music industry, I always introduced myself Thomas J. Bellezza. So whenever anyone spoke to me, they'd always say Thomas J. Bellezza. They wouldn't say Thomas. And it became this thing where I was like, maybe I am just like my first name is Thomas J. Bellezza.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a joke where, like, when I was doing radio, I was like, yeah, my stage name is Thomas J. Bellezza, but my real name is not. And people would always, like, when they meet me, like, what's your real name? I was like, oh, I can't tell you.
Super secret.
There are certain names where the initial just rolls off and it just feels like it's such a part of it. Like
Yeah.
there was an actor I worked with briefly, and he's actually like up in New York doing really big stuff now, but it's James D. Gish. Just James Gish doesn't have the same like feel to it as James D. Gish.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I like that
by
little,
the way, he's adorable. I love him.
I like that little deakish.
Yeah, James D. Gish. Yeah.
Now, one thing I really loved about really getting to know both of you and your company, which is Inked in Gray Press, right? The whole name is Inked in Gray. Is that I love the community-based aspect of Inked in Gray Press, and how you're not only just supportive, you're educational in a sense, and you're not which I really appreciate. You're not just our authors, our authors. You're more like, we have authors, but we care about the community, and that pulled me in. And what was it about that mission, that sense of purpose, that really drew you to push that kind of mentality?
Ooh. That will probably lead us on a 4-hour conversation. But in a past life, I was a social worker and I worked a lot with marginalized communities. And what I realized in talking to them is there's a lot of misconceptions. You know, a lot of people think, you know, you put everybody in, you know, different boxes. You know, if, you know, you have mental health struggles, then you're automatically, you know, unfit for jobs or things like that. And, you know, and it's really not about that. It's really about how, you know, as a person you fit in an environment, you know, and, you know, your story is not dedicated to you are not your mental health issue, you know. And a lot of it was me helping the other individuals overcome those kinds of things and interact with their environment so that they can then, you know, function and do whatever they had, you know, set out for them, you know. So I'm really passionate about building that community and building that support, because as I was working in community social work, that building that community was one of the main things that supported everybody and built them up, and they became stronger because of that, you know. And the more understanding you have about we are people too, you know, and we're not just numbers, we're not just our statistics, we're not just our mental health issue or, you know, our ethnicity or things like that. We are people, and I think that sometimes gets overshadowed when it's just in the world in general, you know. So I believe that, you know, we have authors, but we are a community. You know, we are a community that uplifts, you know, our marginalized community, our marginalized authors and community members, and, you know, and they deserve the same platform that everybody else gets. So I think creating a supportive environment so that they can do that is one of the main and first steps that, you know, we should do as a community, to make it a safe space for people to share their story in the way that they feel that it is.
And when we first started this project, when we first started out on this journey to what would become Inked in Gray Press, I was actually volunteering with a group called Free Arts of Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a big inspiration for me. And that was one of the things we connected with, because what I did was my wife and I would go mentor every week for a semester. And we actually did this for a couple of years at the same location, this group home where these kids were stuck in the middle. Like, they might be going through custody battles. They might be waiting on an adoption or hoping for an adoption. They might have no idea of their trajectory in general. They might just be waiting to age out of the system. You know, they're all in really rough places. But we just did art with them for an hour once a week. And that could be anything. That could be a writing exercise. That could be painting. That could be acting. That could be anything. And just seeing how much they had to offer when they were given the opportunity and when they were invited to, and realizing how important it is to give people that information, that invitation, and to say, we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Because publishing in general, it feels like it has so many barriers, and so many people just have this assumption that that's not for me. Yeah. I'm not welcome in that area. I can never make it there.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to kind of bridge that gap and say, okay, well, maybe they don't want you, but we do.
Right. Yeah. And creating a safe space for, you know, people to approach us and to do so, you know, because a lot of it is, you know, like you were saying with free arts, they didn't think that it was okay to, you know, so making it known that it's okay to express your art the way that you are. We want you, we want to see you, and you deserve to be seen as well.
Yeah, and you know, it's really great that your truth is through action and not just verbiage. You're not just saying, "Hey, it's nice to elevate people," or "It's nice that you're." Not only are you physically going out there and have gone out there and got involved with the community to do these things and allow art to be something they work through, but you created the platform, the Inked in Gray Press, that focuses on those marginal voices and really giving people a chance to be heard, and not limiting their exposure in a way, you know, because a lot of times, you know, some there's some great stories out there that are just pushed down just because of politics or you know, the potential for you know, well, we don't really want to touch that, And so it's great to have that kind of courage to just be like, touch that. This should be out there. This should be just be the standard. Like there's no reason for us to have a category like, oh, this is queer, this is straight. Like it should be novels. It should be art. It should be stories. So I love that you're doing that. And was that the motivation to create Inkton Press? I'm sorry, Inkton Great Press, to give them that platform and take your physical mission to a next level?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely was. You know, working in social work for so long, you just realize how many stories just get buried, you know, or how many people are just pushed down because you're not the right fit, you know, or the right, you're normal or whatever, or, you know, it's just something that I feel very passionate about, you know, so it's kind of how it happened.
Yeah, and we both do. And actually, when we were first envisioning what this could be, we were leaning towards a nonprofit that had those educational opportunities and provided those tools, but we realized we could do more as a press.
Yeah.
And so Dakota really took the lead on this. I say we, but this is really her baby that I've had the joy of helping with along the way. So I just want to point that out because she has been working so hard to make this a reality ever since the beginning. And I'm just thrilled I've been able to be a part of it.
What was it? The first really excited. I think we were in the car. We were driving to a writer's workshop or two.
Which is where we met.
Yes.
Yeah, we met during a writer's workshop locally.
Yeah. You know, and we were just like, you know what, we can do more with this, you know?
Yeah.
And it was just, yeah.
It kind of exploded from there.
Yeah.
And it became what it is now. And
well,
it's
that's how
still
some of the
exploding in good ways.
Well, the best relationships are the ones where you have commonalities, but you know, when somebody, and at times I'm sure you both switch off on leadership qualities, like, you know, you take the lead. And I think it's important for people to understand you don't always have to be the leader, you don't always have to follow, and you don't always have to be giving the options and advice. You know, you have to find what works at the right time, and it's good that you have that energy. There's something you said about normal. And a funny quick story, like I'm polyamorous, and obviously I spend a lot of time with people of the queer community and poly. And we were at a little party, you know, maybe like 7 or 8 of us, and everyone there was some form of poly or some sort of open relationship. And there was one person there that was, I guess the term would be cis male. He was straight. And he sits there and he's looking around. He goes, "Am I the only normal one here in a room filled with?" We all just looked at him like, "What? Do you know where you are?" And he's like, "Yeah, I didn't mean it like that." It's like, well, we understand, but you know, you're ignorant. You're saying something crazy. And
well, if normalcy is defined by your environment, he was the least normal person there from the sound of it. So
yeah, he was the off kilter. He was the but you know, we laughed it off because not everyone understands. They don't. It's not something. There is something else you said in the earlier where you were talking about how you wanted to create a safe space. I'm going to ask you a question, not necessarily to a controversy, but I just want to ask a sort of like a philosophical and creative environment. So you're saying it's a safe place, but do you allow that safe place to be challenged?
Yeah, and I think it's healthy to challenge what a safe space means. And you know, neither of us know everything about everything. You know, I mean, we do try our best to make sure that we are what's the right word I'm looking for? We try to make sure that we are fostering that safe space. But that in itself is something that's very difficult to do, and it's helpful to be mindful of where my knowledge is and where my knowledge gap is. And you know, so making sure if somebody comes in and approaches something or has a suggestion or says, "Hey, this didn't come off the way that you mean it," and that's a point where I need to educate myself, and then so that we can then educate the community and make sure that it stays consistently safe, you know.
And I think, not to interrupt, but I think a key to keeping that balance between a safe space but also allowing for challenge is allowing ourselves to be challenged.
Yes.
We need to recognize that we have limited worldviews. We're both white. We both have, you know, different things that we tick off in boxes, but no one person can tick off every box. And we need to understand when we need to listen.
Yes.
And we need to understand what things can and should be challenged and which ones shouldn't.
Yeah.
So somebody's lived experience, their identity, that's not something we're going to challenge.
Yeah.
That's something we have no authority in. That's their realm to say, this is how I understand the world. This is how I
Yeah.
live. This is what I experience. That's nothing we can challenge.
Yeah.
We can challenge how that's delivered to an audience
Yeah.
to best get across that idea.
Yeah.
But in the end, we're always going to have the author in mind as a very big figure of respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they are the author.
Yeah.
While we're the ones helping bring their story to life. This is coming from them. So giving them that respect is huge for us.
Yeah. And making sure that we have pathways for open communication about those things, because again, we don't know everything. So if there's a point that we need to turn and listen, then we make sure that we are in that space to do that. And that's what we do.
Yeah. And, something about like, you're saying you're white. Like I deal with colorism a lot because I am pale. But I'm Sicilian, so therefore I'm Mediterranean, which means my fellow families are Turkish, African. Like, but if you look at like a family picture of me, you'd be like, who are these people are you adopted or are they adopted? And they're like, no, well, did they get a spray on tan? No, that's their skin. That's,
Yes.
and so also Caucasians were originally the name for Asian. And not Asian like like Chinese or anything. Asian was anyone Asian from Asia, so it was like the Middle Eastern stuff. And then it slowly became part of the northern atmosphere of the so like the Europeans and stuff like that. So Italians, specifically Sicilians, are not Caucasian. We're Mediterranean, and it's always funny because I've always dated. Basically like Spanish or Puerto Rican or black women and stuff like that, because like I'm just used to being around people that are dark skinned, so like I never ever was like it's weird, like I never looked at it that way. And I'm 44, so growing up I had to actually see lots of clear cut racism. Today it's still bad today, I'm not saying it's not, but back then, like I went on a date once and we walked in, and then a white couple walked in, and they got served first, even though we were there first. Then the waiter came, took our order, but wouldn't ask my date the order, because she was a black woman, and asked me, and I was like, yeah, she wants something too. And they were like, oh, I'm sorry. Went back. The people that came in after us got their food first, right? Ate their food, and then our food came out. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like this should not be a thing, And so it's just it's like when I write stories, I write all different skins, all different, But I write a fantasy world, so I don't have to deal with are they African, are they Haitian? No, they're from this planet which has two suns, and like like. Is that something you bring up to your writers when you're like, if you're gonna bring in nationality, and I do that in quotes because what is a nationality when you're dealing with fantasy, especially like if you're in space and they're from Jupiter, but their skin is dark? Do you have to write that dark skin character in a way that is representative of earthbound darker skin characters? Like, how do you approach that for your authors when dealing with something like that?
I think the more important part is to make sure that you're cognizant of any colonialism factors when writing that story, regardless of skin color and culture and things like that. There are going to be similarities no matter what, because you're going to take from your authentic experience or your research or whatever. But it is very important to make sure that how you are addressing any kind of colonialism, and to make sure that you are being appropriate in how you represent that, and not. And making sure that there are nothing that's intentionally discriminatory. And that's, I think, where a lot of sensitivity readers will come into play. I think reaching out to people of color and making sure that their experiences and their history is represented in an appropriate manner.
Yeah, I agree. There was actually a story I worked on a long time ago where the main character was dark skinned because, again, two suns. You're going to need a little bit of melanin, but they were also a gay character, and I didn't make the gay aspect. The one thing I really hate, like when I'm an actor, so every character I play is gay, but I don't tell anyone, and that's the point. Like, you don't act gay. You are gay, or you are whatever you are, you know. And so in the story, it takes a while before there's ever this moment where it's a part of the story. And I had a reader go, "Oh, I thought they were straight. Like they didn't act gay in the book." And I was like, "What do you
What does
mean?
that mean?
Yeah, like what is acting gay?"
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, and they didn't know how to really like how to, because anything out of their mouth would sound really ridiculous at that point. Like, were they too strong? I don't understand why that wouldn't be, like, so
Yeah.
it's nice to challenge the audience as well, because they have these preconceived notions of, or one of my pet peeves is
how a
the,
culture or somebody should act and stuff. And
yeah,
Well, and
exactly.
I think that's important, even when we're talking fantasy, even when we're talking sci-fi, is that recognizing that, yes, we could go off the walls crazy, do whatever we want, but we have to understand that it's being read by a modern audience in our
Yeah.
reality. So
Yeah.
understanding those biases and, engaging with sensitivity readers is a good way to support our authors that want to tell those stories that might not be coming from a worldview that exactly aligns with that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that we can be aware of those biases, even if it's something we're not aware of personally.
Yeah.
We can make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps, that we're
Yeah.
not alienating any of our audiences. Because
Yeah.
the last thing we want to do is, what we're doing is as much for the readers as it is for the authors. And we want to make
Yeah.
sure that we're not alienating any of our audiences or giving them a book that we think is going to be a great experience for them. And then all of
Yeah.
a sudden it triggers all this trauma that we just didn't even know about
Yeah.
because we didn't take the time.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting. I've actually recently just gone back to school.
Yeah.
And I'm in an Africana studies class, and it's challenging us to look at our media that we consume and everything with the
Okay,
lens
yeah.
of knowledge of that. And I've recognized so many things that I've incorporated, not in a negative way necessarily, but that reflect the experience of diaspora and things like that in my characters that I wasn't even aware of. But now that I'm aware of it, I can do it more consciously, and I can do it more specifically in a way that maybe will connect with people more than I did it would have before.
Yeah, and majority of my writing comes from, I get hired to write. That's what I write, scripts and novels, or like I consult on that. That's what I do, and I was hired to write, and I was hesitant at first, but I was hired to write a female centric film script that was a story created by a female writer, and all the main characters are female. And I was like, "Are you okay? Like, why do you want me to, I'm a guy." And she's like, "Well, I heard a lot of great things about you, and some of the notes you gave me when we were talking originally, I was like, you know these characters, you could write them." So she did an experiment where basically I wrote it, and then she let people read it, and then tell them I wrote it. And they loved the characters, and they said they were like really relating to them, and they were like, these, you got these voice. And then she was like, "Oh, a guy wrote it," and they're like, "What?" Like they couldn't understand, and the question came up, like, how did you approach it? And I says, "Oh, they're human."
Yeah.
And I was like, how would a human emotion respond to this psychologically? It just so happens, they're this, and this. And and also one of the main characters, they were in a lesbian marriage. So I didn't approach it like a straight marriage or a lesbian marriage. I approached it like two people in love dealing with this conflict and this struggle. And that's how I just focused on the human element, the emotional element, and basically how do I resolve the conflict? Not how would I resolve the conflict, but how would this conflict, and that's really how I stayed in my lane, I guess would be the phrase, stay in my lane. But I was nervous. Because exactly what you're saying, like if you're going to approach things that aren't necessarily your handlebars, like your bike, you gotta do your research. And but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But it's good to also challenge yourself as a writer, to put yourself into those uncomfortable situations, and like you said, you get your sensitivity readers, and they help you kind of get through it.
Well, and I'd like to tag on to that actually for a moment,
Yeah.
just because we've had a great experience with some of the authors we've worked with on the podcast that we're working on, and we've really learned the value of respecting own voices.
Yeah.
because we had some folks writing from a perspective that we don't share. There was one particular neurodivergency that neither of us have direct experience with.
Mhm.
And so once we realized that this was coming from the writer's experience, the author identifies this way and has this. And so understanding that that's coming from them, we're not going to challenge that that's their worldview.
Yeah.
In our minds, they're pretty much the sensitivity reader on that issue.
Yeah, and a lot of it isn't about making sure what they want to come across is coming across in the appropriate way, and kind of bridging some gaps and making sure that the descriptions are clear, and the way that the pacing is clear, and things like that are story elements to kind of elevate that authentic voice, so that what they're trying to say comes across. So it's we don't seek to change the voice, or the authentic experience, but we do want to make sure that that authentic experience is coming across in a way that's clear to the reader, and that kind of makes it something that's transferable, because when we're telling an authentic story, sometimes it's very difficult to put your words down on the paper in a way that that others can understand what's going on. So making sure the sentences are clear, and making sure that the descriptions, the words are exactly the right word, and so kind of sometimes going just 3 or 4 layers deep into what is the sentence trying to say, and how is it trying to say, and are we using the right sensory words and things like that to kind of convey what the author is trying to say, so that it paints this clear picture of that authentic experience.
Exactly. It's less about it's less about saying that because someone identifies a certain way that it's perfect automatically.
Yeah.
It's us trusting that the viewpoint that they're coming from is an educated, authentic viewpoint.
Yeah.
And then our job is to give them the perspective from the other side. And so, okay, I want to understand this better. How do we help the audience understand this better?
Yeah.
To really
like
get that
slang
across.
terminology within the community might not be completely. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And there are cases where we might challenge a little bit, just because I'm non-binary doesn't mean I might not write something that someone else in the community might find offensive. So we need to be aware of those biases as well, because just because we're coming from that perspective doesn't mean we're not prone to follow these stereotypes or things like that. So we need to be aware of that as well.
Yeah, because our perspectives are right for us, but they might not necessarily be right for other people. And to accept, to be an adult and take the accountability, be like, well, no, I can understand that you're not comfortable with my perspective. I'm comfortable with my perspective, and I'm not punching you, stabbing you, robbing you. I'm not attacking your family. I'm not trying to destroy your life. So who cares? Let me enjoy my perspective and my because you could jump to religions,
and there's also the unidentified biases, and there is a lot of things that we've kind of grown up with in media and things like that as we talk with sensitivity readers, or as, say, a sensitivity reader reads our queer work, it's we may stumble across a bias that we didn't know that we had about something that we identify with. So it's those things as well, to kind of make sure because we don't know until we stumble across it, or somebody puts something in a different perspective, and we're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, so it's just, you uncover biases everywhere you go. There's no person out there who has absolutely none. So we kind of walk into something thinking that, or just assuming that we're going to stumble across a bias, and we're going to have to kind of rearrange the way that we think, because that's the world as it is today. Everything you come across, every person you come across is going to teach you something. You may not know what that is until you're like, oh, I didn't think of that way, and then that sparks maybe, a search of something else that you didn't realize that this was a bias or a discrimination that, you didn't know the history of, so that's then is on us to kind of make sure that we educate ourselves about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we only know what we know, and we only know that in our perception, how we absorb that information. I want to actually touch on one little thing about what you said, and then I would like to kind of go into talking a little bit about shop, the writing process and everything like that. Something I've noticed, and I want to hear your take on it, is because of sensitivity readers, and because, like you said, you're taking a new class, and it's giving you a new look at it, and you can to point out some of my favorite books from Dragonlance, you read those, and as much as I love them, and then you read a book today, and you can see the major leaps we're making in telling purer, truer stories versus like what would be cool or how I see it. Kind of like for example, in Lord Soth books, there's a scene where every woman in the book is just oogling Soth for taking his shirt off, and their prime purpose is to be a thing. And then you read a Brandon Sanderson's book, and you're like, the poor guy doesn't know how to make people flirt, but he has great characters and he has great world building. But when guys and girls flirt, or even characters, you're just like, oh yeah, he's married. He's been married for a very long time. He's been with one woman. All right, I get it. But do you feel that is something that because I'm sure you're avid readers, especially of older content, do you see that evolution? Do you see the change in tone and allowing the platform of novels to sort of grow with the times? Do you see that happening?
I personally do, and I don't. I think it's become more apparent which authors are paying attention to these shifts and which ones aren't.
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot of work being produced that does follow a lot of those old, stereotypes and tropes.
Yeah.
And, not all tropes are bad,
Yeah.
but the awareness of them helps us use them more intentionally.
Mhm.
And you can notice which authors are really doing that
Yeah.
versus which ones are just kind of sticking to what they know and not really trying to push themselves into this new understanding of portraying humanity. Is really, I guess, the way to put it, because that's what it really is.
Yeah, and I think that the positive part of that kind of evolution is the advent of indie authors, because there is another avenue out there for amazing storytelling that does the work, and there's a lot of authors out there who may not be as famous as Brandon Sanderson, but do publish such amazing work, and it's evident that they've done the work, and they don't get enough credit.
Yeah, and that's a really great point that you bring up, is that, and Amazon is one avenue you can go to do self-publishing. The availability of self-publishing has really given different voices a chance to shine, whereas traditional publishing was very like, what's big now? Vampires. Okay, now the Fae, and they just kind of give us what they think, because they want to make money, which I get it. It's a business. I get it. But self-publishing gives people a chance to go, wait, I have a story to tell, and I can. Whereas in the past, if you self-published, you had to buy the books, like, and then do a lot of marketing and do a lot, but now people are just like, I'm just happy I finally got the book out, and so there's a great thing that you brought up. But let's talk shop a little bit.
All right,
here it comes. Big question: who's an outliner? Who's a pantser?
I have become both, I have to say.
Okay.
I do a little bit of both. I like to say, so there's the idea of the gardener and the architect, and I feel like I'm somewhere in between. I plant my plants, I set up a trellis, and then I see which way they take. Okay, so I give it a little bit of structure, but I still give the characters freedom to kind of make their own choices in the moment. And maybe it steers me completely away from my last third of what I had planned, but you know what? It's often better.
Yeah.
But it kind of keeps me to task, and it kind of gives me a good awareness of the pacing of my writing as well.
Yeah, so. And sometimes with an outline, you might spend hours on it. I'm an outliner, but you'll spend hours on it, and you'll be like, this is the story I want to tell. But like you're saying, when you're going through discovery and you're writing out the scenes officially, you're going, I may have miscalculated this character's personality, and you got to be able to flow with it. You have to, so
you can't force them, or then it becomes very apparent to the readers as well, or your character just hates you, and then it just ends up being a disaster.
Yeah.
Why are you making jokes? Go back. Thing. You're the top leader.
In my case, stop flirting with Mothman. You have to work out solving your mother's murder.
Yeah, we got to get through this
thriller. The process is happening, but I put it on pause to work on the podcast. Thank you very much. Yes, there is a gay Mothman romance coming up. So,
listen, you had me at Mothman. Actually, it's kind of funny. We mentioned like letting the characters kind of become who they were. Talking shop, what are your feelings? And I'll let Dakota. Let me give her answer in a second. But you just got my head thinking, so I get it. How do you feel about reading a story where like there's this character, and then there's this character, and like they're each fitting something, but they're not full characters, because this is the fighter, this is the comedian, this is the lover, this is the. How do you feel about that? And how do you tell an author, especially one that you're representing, like, hey, there's no character in your characters? How do you present that?
Well, I think a good way is to give concrete comparisons. And, I think it's just to bring that awareness to that, because I think sometimes when we write, maybe in our first drafts, they end up that way because we're so focused on the main character's journey and getting through that journey, that we need someone to remind us, like, hey, these people are on their own journeys too. Like, we may not need to see all of it, but let's make them more than a Skyrim NPC that has like 3 lines set up in their queue. And I think that's one of the comparisons that works for me, is like, okay, does this feel like a tavern keeper on my journey that has only one purpose in life, and that's one of 3 lines to give me and sell me stuff?
Yep.
Or are they in the middle of a fight with their significant other? Is there a hint of something else going on in the background, even if we don't dive into it? What's going on in their life?
Yeah, well, and a lot of that is, I like to ask the question, what are 3 things about that character that that the reader doesn't, and how do you show those things as the character interacts? So that tavern person who's getting what 3 things is going on and about their background that maybe that the reader doesn't know. So if they're getting into a fight, then show me that they're fighting in the background with their significant other. Are they being does that mean they're grumpy to their customers? Does that mean, they're snapping at people they don't normally snap at? So it's like, tell me some things that are hidden and show them without actually showing them.
Exactly. Show, don't tell.
Yes. Tell me your character's problem without telling me your character's problem.
One of the prompts I like to give is similar to that. It's 3 things that character would always do and 3 things that character would never do. And is there something that would challenge that?
Yeah.
Because maybe it's those things that the character thinks they would never do.
Yeah.
But it's something to consider.
Yeah.
And one thing I tell like my clients, I say, your job as a writer is to present information to the audience and then challenge that information. And that's how you create story. That's, narrative is ultimately, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen, this happen. But it's those challenges and just enough information where it's vague but informative. And I don't know if you saw something, I may have posted it, where I'm just like, anytime somebody says something in a movie or a show, I'm like, well, I know what's going to happen, because the moment you have to mention things, but we're writers, so we see the seeding and we're already expecting the payoff. But sometimes authors don't do that, and because it's a learned skill to really seed, and sometimes you could seed really well, and other times it's sort of like, he needs the sword. But all right, so are you a pantser or an outliner?
I am a chaotic pantser. Is
that chaotic neutral pantser?
It depends on the moment, I think. But I'm very much a pantser, in the sense of, I come up with something and then I'll go on that little tangent for a minute. I have index cards. Everything is written on index cards, and there's a stack of them. Where I like to write down little notes, and then at the end of the day or the week or whatever, when I sit down, I go through all those index cards and I go, oh yeah, I remember that. And then before I start to write, because, it gives me then the inspiration to then write out exactly what I was going for, or something completely different, because, apparently I thought it was cool at the time, but now it's stupid.
We've all been there. Many times.
Right?
With a bear outfit.
Yeah. I like to keep them, though, on index cards, because if I don't use it with the character I was intending it to, then I can apply it somewhere else, or, to a different character or a different story, or that may spark something completely different in some completely different, creative endeavor, so I like to keep a bucket of shit, literally, that literally just is colored index cards or whatever with different notes, because I'm very much, I get ideas everywhere, and and that's hard because they're all over the place, you know. So
And I'm the same way. I have what I like to think of as my cryo chamber document,
yeah.
which is all the ideas that I'm like, I want to do this someday, but it needs to stay right here until I finish some of this other stuff. Or
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with this yet, but I know I want to do something with it one day.
Scrivener's great for that.
Yeah.
Every book you're
I
like,
need
how
to
do
be
I
on
fit this
Scrivener.
cat in there?
I love it.
Well, as a chaotic pantser, do you find yourself falling into the pattern of a traditional pantser where they get to the midpoint, and at the midpoint they're like, I think I found the voice of the book, so I'm going to start over.
I happened about a third of the way through, and I had to mostly not because I always had the voice down, but I didn't have a lot of the world building down. I had the overall plot, and the overall plot was in my head. But as I started writing the story, the magic system started to come out, and then the others, I went down some research deep dives, and then when I came back, it twisted it a little bit, but then it got more in depth, and then I kept going. So now I kind of have to go back and rewrite because I've now, as I've gone, it's come out more and more, and it's like the opposite of a pyramid, I guess, where it's tiny, in the beginning, and then it's expanded into so much. So now I'm at the point where, I'm like, okay, so now I've kind of started not outlining, but I've kind of started like that story Bible that goes, now that I've fleshed out the characters, and I guess maybe that is my outline in the sense of as I'm going, I'm getting more and more detailed. I've now started like a story Bible where I've info dumped all of my things so that I can keep track of all of the chaos, literally, sections in Scrivener. So now when I go back, I have, the grandmother represents this. So, okay, so now I'm going to go back and make sure that I'm doing that intentionally. So.
Yeah, well, and actually, I'd like to add a little piece here because that's actually pretty much how I used to do things. And just in case anybody out there is interested in kind of pushing themselves to be a little bit more in between, what actually got me there was I would pants on a screenplay version of whatever book I was about to do, because that filters it down to just action, dialogue, bare bones setting. And after that, I could basically rewrite the story with those changes I had in mind. But that was basically an outline to me. Yeah. And so now I just kind of refine the process because I have ADHD. Yeah. And so like efficiency is big for me. And if I spend too much time on something, it's just never going to get finished. Yeah. So I've kind of turned that into the outline, but also reverse outlines work really well for me.
Oh, yeah.
Starting from the end and just kind of figuring out how they get there. Yeah. So those are some ways that I've kind of like pushed myself to become a tiny bit more organized about it. It's not always the case, but it's helped. It has helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I started out as a pantser, and a client hired me, and they're like, could you give me an outline before you write? And I was like, a what? And I was like, yeah, I guess. But, and that first job doing the outline, I was like, I think I'm an outliner. Cause like, I just liked being able to look at it and then freely, I pants the scenes.
Yeah.
But like that's those bullet points. Yeah, and you discover it. Something else that because you're also a publishing company, you're a press company. So where do you find, and talking shop, where do you find the biggest pushback when it comes to your writers, your authors, and trying to get them to where they got to get?
This one's all you.
Balancing, I think, style and clarity and punctuation and grammar. I think because there's punctuation and is part of the voice. However, the barrier comes between, it does still have to be clear, so sometimes it's creating that balance between being clear in your sentences with punctuation but also allowing that space for creativity because, punctuation and grammar and things like that are part of the style and they are part of the voice. So creating that balance, I have one of my authors will tell you we got into a semicolon argument. And it's something that we laugh about now, and we did before because we're very close, but it was, I like my semicolons and I will die on that hill. So, and it's but style versus clarity. So, so obviously we worked it through. But we do hang out on Fridays. It is, cutting all your semicolons. So when his
Say goodbye.
right, say goodbye. I'm cutting them all.
I believe the rule is at 40, you're supposed to check your semicolon. So,
You know, so but it, you know, it's something that you have to have a conscious conversation about, you know, and so a lot of times it's, oh, I didn't think of it that way or whatever, and coming to kind of an agreement on what fits and what's clear and what's style, you know.
yeah. You did say something that was confusing, though. What is grammar for a writer? What is grammar, you were saying? What is that?
I'm not really sure myself.
You can ignore it. It's
yes,
fine.
ignore it.
Oh,
Yes.
all right. Yeah, don't you have editors for that? Like I have to be the artist. Okay.
What's punctuation again?
Yeah,
Right.
punctuation. Why is everything exciting for these characters? I like my explanation point.
What do you mean I can't have a full chapter without a period?
Yeah, Faulkner did it. You are not Faulkner. All right, so let's get to talk a little bit of business and your insight to the industry, especially because of your position and how you do it. So here's a straightforward question: what would the ideal series of actions look like for an author to go from finishing their book to being published by Inked and Gray Press?
Well, first you have to write it, which is a lot, at least for us, sometimes the hardest part, you know. And then, so there's a lot of misconception of I have to have my book professionally edited before, you know, I submit it to a press. And I can't speak for everybody, but that's not always the case, you know. We do want to see the elements of your story. So we want to get a clear view of what the story aims to do. And then we take the editing from there. So it doesn't have to be professionally edited. That is, the financial piece is definitely a barrier for individuals going into publishing, whether it's self-publishing or small press or traditional press. There's definitely a financial gate there that we try to eliminate. So, you know, although make use of your beta readers and, you know, any critique groups or writing groups that you can access, because that's going to make sure that your story is clear so that we understand what you're trying to get across as far as your story and the one you're trying to tell. And then, so when somebody submits to Inked, we have a submission crew that reads, you know, and looks for the voice in the story, you know. As far as editing, again, we take care of that once it comes on board. But once it passes the first layer and it gets recommended to us as to, hey, this is a good story, we should read it, then we read it and we decide if we want to sign them or not. And then negotiations proceed from there. I like to have a phone call with every author to see what their vision is, you know, and if there's anything that I found confusing or whatever when reading the story, then that's the opportunity to talk to that author and go, what were you aiming for? And this is what I'm seeing. Is this what you're seeing? Because my goal as a publisher is to elevate their story, you know, and make their story clearer. So a lot of the author phone call is ironing out what story they are trying to tell and how they wish to tell it, and then kind of going from there as to, you know, the rest of the signing process and things like that.
Okay, all right. That sounds like a pretty simple and straightforward process, because I know a lot of authors don't always understand how a publisher works and how to get into a publisher and what they're expecting from you. And it's really nice that you're saying that for your particular publishing company, you're not necessarily looking for a finely tuned, edited book. But I do have a follow up to when is too much when it comes to getting everyone to read it, you know, how many times you're going to rewrite it. When do you got to pull the plug and just say the book is the book?
As far as the author's perspective before they submit, you mean, or like on our end?
Well, I'll give you an example. In the music industry, one of the things that would happen to a lot of musicians and their bands is they would record an album at a studio. That's $15,000. Then they would hear the album and they go, you know, I think we could change this part of the song. And then they're like, well, if we're gonna do one song, let's do all the songs. So what could have taken, say, 6 months to write and record and get they take 6 or 7 years. And I'm not even making those numbers up. I have one friend who's 15 years, same album. They're afraid to release it because they keep going, wait, I can make it better. I can. So what I'm ultimately saying is, for an author, something to check themselves. When do you feel it's time to go, you know what? Maybe I need to step away from this because I'm not the right person to say it's ready.
I think that point is when you're so over anxious that that's your worry, and you're not identifying specific plot points or character points that either you or a beta reader or a critique partner has identified. That is going to be subjective. I mean, Brandon Sanderson says that he rewrites his stuff 6 or 7 times, which that may be what works for him, and that's maybe part of his process. But everybody's going to be different. So something to do is to reach out to somebody that you trust that has read your writing, and ask for a second opinion, because we ourselves need to check ourselves in the sense of is this because I'm anxious about being finished, because that can be an anxiety thing too, of actually saying you're done. Maybe less the reaction, but more just like, oh my god, what do I do now? I'm done.
Because then there's the fear of success or rejection
Yeah.
that you're putting off by saying, oh, well, it just needs a little more work.
Yep.
Yeah.
So being able to identify where that unease is coming from.
Yeah. Be honest with yourself in that standpoint.
Because sometimes it is the story that needs work, but sometimes you get to a point where you've been so close to it and so in it that sometimes the best course of action is just to shelve it and work on something else for a while and come back with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not even the amount of editing.
It's the state of the
it's the state of it, but it's also the pacing of the editing and how much your brain has just been obsessing over it, that sometimes you need to cleanse that a little bit before you can actually see what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
So
in the music industry, engineers basically work on mixing and getting them, the songs down, and they actually advise the engineer and the mixers to not master the song because they're so used to hearing it over and over and over again that they can't really listen to it anymore. So that's why I usually go to someone to do a master, which is also the same thing with there's no master for an author, but there is a line producer, there is a copy editor, and I've always been in the school of you always do the first edit yourself. So you write the book, you just kind of throw it out there, and then you do the first edit. And when you feel comfortable with that first edit, you let your alpha readers check it out, which are usually like other readers, other authors and people you trust, professionals. And then you take their notes and you rewrite it. And then you get the beta readers, which are usually your audience. And do they like the story? Are they relating to it, et cetera, et cetera? And once, if you could get through the beta readers and the book works and you do your edits, that's when you go, all right, I'm going to hire my actual editors and they could take care of it. But I do have a question about, because I like that you said that the book doesn't necessarily have to be finally cleaned up with editing and stuff like that. What about story? Have you ever been in a position where a book came to you that they felt was finished, but you knew it wasn't, but there was something there and you were like, we want to work with this writer?
That is a hard question, only because I'm trying to go back through all of the stories, and every book that we've picked up was because of the story. So I don't think I've ever had a story where it didn't need something.
Well, to use that and to bounce off the previous discussion, I think from an author standpoint, someone who's looking, they have the story and trying to figure out when it's right.
Yeah.
Focusing on the story and making sure that they're telling the story that they want to is the most important thing for the author that's submitting.
Yeah.
Because copywriting can happen afterwards. Copy editing, line edits can happen afterwards. But if the story has promise, if the character's journey is interesting, then the rest can be changed.
Yeah.
But if there isn't much potential in the story or the driving forces of whatever this tale being told is, then there's not much that a publisher can do with it to help.
Yeah.
that has to come from the author.
Yeah.
Like that, I think is probably the most important thing to consider when submitting.
Yeah.
Is making sure that you feel that your story is being told.
Yeah.
Because from there, it can be tweaked, it could be polished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and their voice too. I not to put words in your mouth, but like the voice of the author is so important because what is there there's like 7 stories you could tell or something like that. There's not a lot of, there's the monster, there's the, there's all these different, but there's only 7, and you could have a great story, but like all right, so there's a shark and there's a beach and there's a sheriff, and you're like, this is a great story. But how, like, Steven Spielberg made that movie, no one else could make that movie. It would have been a completely different movie because it wasn't. So do you also sometimes bypass the story going, all right, this is a pretty traditional trope, let's say it's best friend to a relationship, story, but the voice is so good, like their style of writing is good, but the story is just generic, but the way they tell the story in their voice. Do you ever feel comfortable saying, you know what, we may not be interested in this story, but I would really love to develop this writer?
I think we've taken a couple podcast stories in
Mhm.
that sense,
Yeah.
where that the voice of the author was just so powerful that it was, we know you have a story,
Mhm.
and we have something that would be interesting for you, but we may not think it's this particular one.
Mhm.
And I think we've had 2 or 3 on the podcast that we're developing in that manner, and they've been a joy to work with.
Oh yeah, and we've come out with some amazing stuff by the end. Like I sit there and I look at the final version and then remember back to the first version that we got, and I'm just amazed.
Yeah.
Because really sometimes it just takes someone asking you the right questions to trigger those thoughts in your head of going, oh, I didn't even think about doing it that way.
Yeah.
And then because they have that stellar voice and that stellar creativity already, all they needed was that question.
Yeah.
They just need that spark, and then they're like, oh yeah, I got it. And
Yeah.
it's great to see when people do that and they take it and run with it.
Yeah. And it's a lot of that is about getting to know the author as a person, and, and talking. We do a lot of talking, and talking about, about what we're looking for or what they're trying to tell, and just kind of having that dialogue of, where their strengths are, and, and just kind of brainstorming and things like that, and they've come back always with something amazing. And a lot of it is about listening. I can't stress that enough, where it's listening to that other person that, you're trying to mentor and build up and empower. And because if you're not listening, then there's a top-down power dynamic, and that's not going to be effective. So it's something that is more, is collaborative, so we're trying to build on those skills and maybe strengthen the ones that need a little bit of strengthening, and, just kind of meet the author where they're at, and kind of work from there. And we've had really great results because it's about listening and honing into what the author's trying to achieve and what the author wants.
And I think that goes back to where we started with this whole discussion, was creating it as a community instead of just essentially a pump and dump, like just take a book, publish it, make money off it, next one. Yeah. It's more about the community. It's more about fostering the author's growth, whether they choose to stay with Inked or not for their next book. We're not trying to lock them into anything, but we're trying to help them get the tools and just to hone it and help us all grow together, because we're still growing. We're always growing. That's just human nature.
Yeah.
But if we help each other,
right? Yeah. We're almost at the end, but I wanted to bring up one quick thing and just get your thoughts on it. You had spoken earlier, and by the way, I loved your answer. Let me just put it. But I know if we get into that, we'll be here for another hour, because it was a good, strong answer. And for the audience listening, I would rewind it, listen to what they said, and this is for the audience. The misconceptions and the fears that you build inside you of reaching out to a publisher. These are 2 amazing publishers working at one big company that they built for the community. They started from the scratch, and they're constantly always growing. But if you listen carefully, they're telling you that it's okay to take a chance on yourself and let someone hear you, and that it's it's not about being perfect. It's about taking action, but with that said, so what what you had mentioned earlier about sensitivity readers and trigger warnings and stuff like that. I saw something on the internet, and I would love to hear your opinion on this. Uh, the argument is, should you give away your trigger warnings to ruin the plot? And then I saw somebody write, I have a link to my website that's for trigger warnings, and it says, if you need to see trigger warnings, go to this link, and that's in the book. What are your feelings on listing the trigger warnings versus, say, having a link that goes to your website, so people who might not necessarily be interested in trigger warnings aren't spoiled by, like, this was going to come up?
I think I have an answer for this, because it's something I've considered ever since we came up with the idea of this podcast. It is horror.
Mhm.
It goes into a lot of themes that aren't necessarily happy, fuzzy, warm feelings.
Yeah.
So it is something for us to consider. And the best way I've seen this done in other podcasts that I think we'd like to emulate, I think it comes down to choice, giving people the choice to read the trigger warnings instead of just listing them off completely every single time. There might be some that are just very slight that would be worth listing in the description at the beginning at the audio, but I think primarily the best way, rather than a website, we want to make it as simple as possible for people, no matter where they're listening or where they're experiencing it, because accessibility is also key.
Yeah.
But if there are significant trigger warnings for an episode at the beginning saying, hey, there are some trigger warnings you might want to be aware of, check the full description for this episode to view them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
That way it's in the same program that they're already in. They don't have to take any additional steps. And it's not something that's going to pop up automatically. It's going to be at the end of the description after the summary.
Yeah.
So it's not going to give it away to anybody that doesn't want to know.
Yeah.
And then even telling them the start and the end point. I
Exactly.
was watching a podcast, and they said this is the beginning of the trigger warning we mentioned in the description, but you can fast forward to this timestamp and to avoid that. And I think that gives the person the choice, because I mean, science-wise, as a social worker, I've been reading a lot of the research first of the, yes, pro trigger warning, anti-trigger warning, and I mean, the data is still a little inconclusive. So, but I also, regardless of the data, there is the consent option or thought.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that, somebody, if they need the trigger warning, if they feel if they are at the point in their life where they need that trigger warning, then that is something that they can use and have. But if they are at the point in their journey where they don't need them, then they have those as well.
Well, and I think it's important to note that I feel like there's a little bit of a misconception over the purpose of trigger warnings.
Yeah.
A trigger warning isn't to say, oh, if this thing upsets you, don't listen to it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Give people the choice. And I liken it to food allergies.
Yeah.
When you're at a restaurant and you say, okay, does this dish have gluten in it?
Yeah.
And somebody said, and the waiter might say, well, there's a little trace amount in the cheese. So they're not going to say, so you can't have it.
Yeah.
They are giving the option to the person dining to decide whether or not their sensitivity is great enough that they need to avoid it. That's all we're trying to do with trigger warnings is educate people so they can make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, and TV shows and movies, when you're watching on like HBO Max or something like that, not that we're sponsored by them, but hey, HBO Max, hey. But they have the little thing that comes up in the corner. It says smoking, violence, nudity, sexual, whatever. But like for a book, I like the idea. What you're saying is like you don't want them to leave the podcast, so look at the description. Like in a book, if the beginning of the book says go to the back of the book for trigger warnings, instead of like kind of like you just kind of see the thing. Oh, if I want to see them, I could actually just go to the back of the book.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's good to do that. I was thinking from a marketing standpoint why I like the go to the website. Is because you're trying to create traffic, and it's but that's
I have a background in marketing too, so I understand that. But
yeah.
I tend to prefer accessibility over click rates. So
I
think we could do
great.
both.
Yeah.
Like if you're considering buying these books but worried about trigger warnings, we could have places on the website where every trigger warning for every book is listed for people to view if they choose. Because it would suck to buy an entire book and then find out that it's going to trigger you, so you like don't even want to enjoy reading it because you're worried about when it's going to come up, and it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
I really want to go into more about trigger warnings, but we definitely didn't.
We could go on for hours.
Yeah, I could be like, well, what if elephants trigger people? We don't think about that, but I'm all for trigger warning. I'm just saying, like, how do we attack the devil's advocate to really expand? This is the challenging aspect.
Well, and I think that's when the food allergy scenario comes up, because there are random food allergies like that most people don't have. I got a full panel done recently. I found out I'm mildly allergic to carrots. I don't expect restaurants to put carrot allergies on their menu.
Yeah.
But you also read the description of the meal and maybe the picture that says, "Oh, look, there's carrots in there."
But most restaurants are going to have the common allergies listed because those are the most frequently occurring. And I think the same thing goes for trigger warnings. Yeah. We're going to do our best to list the most common ones that are out there, or the ones that we're aware of, and let people make that choice for themselves.
Yeah. And also make sure that your blurb or your back of the book description kind of hints to, not only the plot, but if there is maybe something, then, somebody can infer, that there may be, some kind of trauma or tragedy that goes on there, so that they can then open the book and go, okay, now I need specifics, because this is how the back blurb goes, and I'm interested, but I just want to make sure that this is okay for me.
Well, and keeping an open dialogue with our audiences too. So if someone approaches us and says, look, I have this specific trigger about animals dying. I can't handle a book with an animal dying in it. I didn't see it listed in any of the trigger warnings. Can you tell me if this specific book contains this? Yeah. And then we can tell them.
Yeah.
So if we make sure that we keep the reputation of being accessible and being open to questions like that, even though, a lot of places might consider that extra, it's not. It's really not. We want our audiences to enjoy the books. Yeah. That's the point. So if that helps them know that they're buying something they're going to enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to encourage people to feel comfortable talking to you, because that's how you build your community. Before we go, I do want to tell you, because you mentioned your podcast a couple of times, I believe it's My Father's Files. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So My Father's Files, all the information for Inked in Gray Press, My Father's Files, and my two amazing guests will be in the description below. If you're listening on Spotify, there is a description below. But you could be watching this on YouTube and seeing our amazing faces and my red background. With that said, I want to give you a wholeheartedly thank you, and I'm grateful that you gave me your time. I know you're busy to come on The Right Mindset and let us hear a little bit about you.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having us. This was really fun.
Yeah, so I hope to have you on in season 2. We can talk about other crazy things, but
let's do it.
Yeah.
But until then, audience, remember to keep developing the right mindset.